boy. Buckle my shoe.
Tessa Lark and Michael Thurber. We loved Wooden Soldier. How long have you two been playing together these bass and violin duets?
Well, we started playing together for the first time actually through a another original composition. So Tessa had commissioned me to write her a violin concerto a while ago now, 5 or 6 years ago. She had heard
And
some.
I seem to recall that there was an interesting story about that Tessa had heard something of yours on the radio or online or something. What was that?
Yeah, Michael and I actually met at a board meeting for From the Top, which was originally, a radio show on NPR and has now become so much more. So Michael and I met on in one of those board meetings, and at around that time, Michael was having a broadcast on From the Top of another concerto of his called the Three Musketeers, which is a four-person concerto. And I heard it on the radio, and I loved it so much. I was in the car on a way to a gig, and I loved it so much that I had to pull over immediately and call Michael and tell him and ask him to write me a concerto. And so he said okay. So that's the story there. I just fell in love with his music immediately after hearing it on From the Top.
And that piece was appropriately titled Love Letter.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Well, so yeah, I got more than I bargained for because I got a commission, but I also got a life partner, a fiance, out of that situation. So that was actually how we began dating as well, as we sort of got to know each other through the writing process, and it was just wonderful. So then it was really only a matter of time until we decided to start jamming, and we had played informally within the first month or two that we met each other because Tessa's dad is a banjo player, and so
Right,
they
right.
were in New York for a trip. And this was Tessa lived in Boston at that time, so they came to New York for a trip, and we just jammed in my apartment in Brooklyn at that time. So we'd always been playing casually, but then it was in 2016, I believe, that WQXR, the radio show here, or the radio station here in New York City, asked us to come and perform live in their green room space. They were doing a Valentine's Day concert, and they wanted real musical couples to perform
Mm.
together. And so they said, "Do you guys have anything that you'd play?" So we thought, well, there's like no literature for the double bass and the violin. So we immediately went to Bach. And we thought, his two-part inventions sound good on any instrument. And we love that music. And so we started putting together a few of the Bach inventions. And then that led to us writing original music. And that was really got us, what got us up and running. It all started with the Bach C Major, which we're going to play for you today as well.
That sounds great. And this so is the perfect illustration of the genesis and the development of this particular number, the Bach C Major invention that we're about to hear, then blends into another tune called Tumble Time.
Yeah, so that was maybe the third or fourth original that we wrote together. And the cool thing about that piece is that it's actually sort of loosely based off of the C major invention. It's also in C major. It's about the same length, and it's a very similar theme. You'll hear the first invention theme goes up, boo-do-do-dee-do-dee-do-dum, and ours goes dee-do-do-do-dum. So it's sort of like an inversion of the theme. So we've always been playing them together as a medley because it's sort of, in 3 minutes expresses what we're all about, sort of reimagining Bach and writing our own original inventions.
So let's definitely hear that right now. Tessa Lark and Michael Thurber, C Major invention of Bach, tumbling into Tumble Time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was Michael Thurber and Tessa Lark with Bach C Major Invention and Tumble Time. Speaking of pieces that you wrote for Tessa, there's another piece that's in process now, a double concerto. This seems like the next step in the genesis of this partnership, that you folks are going to play with the Peninsula Symphony when we're able to do that.
Yes.
I probably has to be postponed again, but we will do it as soon as we possibly can. And we're looking forward to that. Tell me a little bit about how the double concerto is organized and how it's being organized in your brain.
Yeah, it's a scary place in the brain. It's there's all sorts of weird stuff going on up there. But yeah, this is really exciting. I mean, you nailed it the way you said it. I mean, it's a real evolution of what this duo has been all about so far. And that's actually sort of how I'm approaching the writing of the piece, which is really exciting. So in the past, when I've written full orchestra pieces, it's sort of the typical solitary composer process. But now that we have such a rapport and such a repertoire of original music as a duo, we've actually been approaching this by playing together and improvising together. And then when we come up with an idea that we both are excited about, I jot it down. And so all of the raw material so far in the piece has come from actual, us playing. And we're also the momentum of the piece, like the sort of the impetus behind the music comes from us, which is also different for me. In the past, I tend to think much more thematically and developmentally and with the orchestration and everything, but this is really sort of like a tour de force for us, and the orchestra really just sort of supports. And there's a few moments where it's not completely done, but there's a few moments where the orchestra takes over and has sort of soli sections and stuff, but yeah, the thrust of it is really sort of us together, which is really exciting. The other thing that's really different about this piece for me is, I write a lot of theater music as well. And so because of that, a lot of the time when I approach instrumental music, I approach it from the perspective of a story. Like a lot of my other pieces, I've already had an arc in mind before I sit down to write. But this is the first time ever that I'm not doing that. I'm literally just letting our energy be the creative, fulcrum, so to speak. And it's really thrilling, but it's also kind of weird. I don't even know what I'm going to call it yet. And again, that's strange for me because normally the title is kind of what inspires me. But it's just sort of going to be, a bunch of music. And I think right now, at least, it's very much in the traditional form, concerto form. It's three movements. Sometimes I'm interested in like a fourth movement, because sometimes the middle movements, kind of like a symphony with two middle movements. Sometimes I feel like that's nice in a concerto, at least these days. So that might emerge, but right now, so far, it's a pretty standard concerto form,
Standard in form, at least a number of movements and how they're organized, but not standard in content, that's for sure.
That's right. That's right.
And I realized that what you said about having a pre-planned sort of plot, a basis for your composition probably emerged from the fact that you did a lot of composing for theater. You were a composer for public theater, one of my favorite groups in New York. And I guess that was connected to Royal Shakespeare and Manhattan Theater Company. And so when you're writing incidental music or music to fit a theater company, you're structured and you have a concept of how that drives the story of the theater in a particular direction. But this is a whole different thing.
It's a whole different thing.
Yeah, it totally is. And that's interesting you bring that up, because I think that's what I was struck by most in Michael's music when I heard it in Three Musketeers. And even the title itself is clearly inspired by a storyline. And I'm most drawn to music that has a programmatic feel to it. And Beethoven, for just one small example, was always utilizing his own stories, whether he shared them or not, to make these great pieces. And so that's what I love so much about Michael's music, is that it always tells a very vivid story if you know what to listen for in music or not. And maybe for this concerto, you've been inspired to not follow a strict storyline because you've been so busy with Goddess, which is going to be out in Berkeley Repertory Theater, hopefully next fall in
Hopefully, yeah.
2021. So
We'll
it's
see.
a nice escape for you to write this. And for me, it's fun to have permission to be a sort of armchair expert and watch the orchestration happen and be able to say, I like this. What about this?
Oh,
And this.
you're so humble though. I mean, it's really really fun to write for this duo because it really is collaborative and it's so much less lonely than when you're just writing pieces by yourself, which has its own
Sure.
magic to it. But and Tessa instrumentally is, really, and I'm not saying this because we live together. Truly, she's one of my favorite instrumentalists, and it's just really inspiring because she knows so much about string playing that she's made me a way better bass player, but also she has such a great sense for what's going to really work on the violin, and just hearing that is very very inspiring. I never pursue any idea that doesn't make her smile. It's like a litmus test, when she's like, yeah, then I'm like, okay, we're keeping that. And if she's like, no expression, get rid of it.
Well, we were just touching on your origins in Kentucky, Tessa. We've heard a little bit about Michael's background, but you grew up in Kentucky. Your dad was in a bluegrass group, and you started not on the violin. What was that all about?
Yeah, I started on the mandolin when I was 4. And my dad, he's actually still to this day in that bluegrass band. Of course, they're not doing as much these days with quarantine and all. But I played for a little while in that band. It's called The Narrow Road. But I did play fiddle in his band. But yeah, I started on the mandolin, and I remember distinctly how much I loved that instrument. Boil Cabbage Down was the first tune I ever learned, and I remember playing that for my kindergarten class when I was 6 years old or so. And recess happened right after our show and tell when I showed everyone my mandolin and played. And I remember for recess, I preferred, instead of playing with all the kids, literally facing a corner and practicing my mandolin. And the teacher came up and said, "Are you okay? You want to play with your friends in the sandbox?" I said, "No, thanks. I'm happy practicing." So that was indicative there that I was destined to practice something.
Right, and the rest of your life has kind of taken off from there. I first met Tessa when she was a competitor in the Irving Klein competition, which happens in San Francisco every year, which Tessa won in 2008 with gorgeous performances. As a consequence of that, she played with the Peninsula Symphony shortly thereafter, with the Bruch Concerto, which was quite wonderful. But it was a rocket ship after that, the Naumburg competition, the Indianapolis silver medal. You've won the, I know, this is just going to embarrass you, but let's go for that. Borletti Buitoni Trust, the Avery Fisher Career Grant, Lenore Annenberg Fellowship, just one thing after another has catapulted your career. And we got a chance to spend some time together, what was it, 5 years ago, when we engaged you to be the soloist with my youth orchestra's concert tour of Italy. And that was incredible fun. At that point, you were playing the Gingold Stradivarius violin, which was part of the Indianapolis Prize. And 100 youth orchestra kids got to hear a magnificent Strad played even more magnificently by Tessa Lark day after day in rehearsals and concerts. What an experience for those kids, and it was so much fun for me.
Oh my gosh, that was such a blast and one of my favorite memories to date. I still have this amazing token of memories from that trip, all of the kids and parents and everybody signed some precious notes in this book, and I have it out on my desk and I see it every day. That was such a special trip with all of those kids in particular, and I remember playing in the orchestra for one of our final concerts, just sitting there in the back of the firsts with everyone, and it was so fun riding all of those buses everywhere with the kids and getting to know them. And I remember in particular with that Strad playing Mendelssohn Concerto in Cremona in a church there and sort of bringing the instrument back home. And do you remember it was over 100 degrees that day, so hot and humid. All of our instruments were sweating, and I was thinking, how is this instrument going to survive? But of course it sounded better than ever because it was back. That was an amazing experience in every way.
That was a 15th century church that we, had to kind of wonder whether that instrument, that Strad, had been played in that church 300 years before. And we all visited the Cremona Violin Museum, which is the home of the Strad. And you were carrying the Strad with you every place we went, of course, because you don't leave that around, hanging around someplace. And we were all getting ready to go into the Strad Museum. And Tessa had the Strad in the case strapped to her back, and people at the entrance said, "What's that?" As well, it's violin. You can't bring that in. Well, this is the Strad Museum. This is a Strad. Why can't I bring a Strad into the Strad Museum to visit its relatives? Anyhow, they wouldn't let you do that. So we all took turns babysitting the Strad while each of us went through the museum. But you cannot bring a Strad to the Strad Museum. We learned that.
Yes, note to self. Don't
right.
do that.
Exactly.